Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I hope you're doing well. I'm doing fabulously, thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to sharing this lovely story with you this evening. So I do hope that you're going to get that quintessential perfect drink, whatever it is, a hot cup of cocoa to keep you lovely and warm, or perhaps something a little bit cooler and more refreshing. But whatever it is, let me know about it. I love hearing from you. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, when you're a student, money can be a big contentious issue in your life, unless you're fortunate enough to have wealthy, affluent parents who are generous in assisting you with your finances. Then you are indeed one of the lucky ones. My abstemious, puritanical parents were wealthy, but they weren't generous with their money. They were naturally frugal in every regard. The kind of people that watched every penny, always used coupons and special offers to buy their groceries when it wasn't necessary for them. But my parents loved saving, as every saving was a jackpot win to them. In a nutshell, they were quintessential cheapskates. In the same way that a person might get a rush from riding a roller coaster, my prudent parents got a buzz from saving money. My mother once bought 500 liros because they were half price. She was literally orgasmic about her purchase, and I'm not joking either.
"Oh my God, I can't believe it! I got these euros at half price!"
she said, purring in delight like an excitable cat, her voice raised in a jubilant high pitch.
"They were half price! I've got 500 of them!"
I would watch my father dashing out to his truck to have a look at the liros in the trunk. I remember watching them through the kitchen window. My father's eyes widened with excitement as he gave my mother a high five. I'd never seen two people so enamoured and euphoric by a purchase of liros. To a casual observer, they most certainly looked like two people who had won a lot of money from a day at the Derby. In their mind's eye, they most certainly had. My father eagerly raced into the house, his heart pounding excitedly, his fingers trembling with urgent anticipation, as he vigorously began to tap away at his calculator to work out the thrifty saving that he'd made from the purchase of liros.
"We've saved $8 on a pack of 24 liros!"
He began to jump up and down like an exuberant puppy.
"We're saving an absolute fortune," he had chuckled. "We need to buy more. This saving is huge."
Both my parents had dashed to the car in a heightened, excited frenzy, like rambunctious dogs that had been promised a spectacular walk, only to return with 1,000 more liros. I mean, who does that? My parents, that's who. Those liros took up a huge amount of space in our home, but my parents didn't care. They'd got a fantastic bargain, and at the end of the day, that was all that mattered. My mother once learnt of an illustrious bakery that threw out some of its perfectly good baked goods at the end of the day in a dumpster. She'd go dumpster diving in the evening, returning with a huge smile on her face, along with dirty smudges everywhere, and filthy jeans covered in unmentionable muck that smelt positively dicey.
"Oh my God," she explained. "Look, I got these chocolate brownies. You know, the ones with the caramel. Oh my word, they're so delicious, so tasty. Can you believe it? They actually threw these out. And I got those green macaroons. Nothing wrong with these at all. Completely free. Custard tarts. Oh my word. And pecan nut pie donuts. To think I didn't have to pay a penny for any of this."
I found my parents' bizarre, incongruous behaviour, although endearing, somewhat embarrassing, especially in supermarket queues when they would hold up the entire line, searching for their coupons in purses and wallets. In those times, I would rather be anywhere else in the world than with my parents.
"Wait a moment, hold on there," my mother would say. "I definitely got a coupon for peanut butter. I know I have. Just wait a moment."
Sometimes she would empty out her entire bag on the counter, scrabbling through the lipstick, purse, makeup mirror, and all kinds of other odds and ends, in earnest hot pursuit for the coupon.
"I know I've got it somewhere here. Oh, here it is. I found it," she would cry excitedly. "That's a $7 saving. $7.
Invariably, someone at the back of the queue would say, "Get a move on, woman. We're all waiting. You're holding us up. Stop being so selfish." My parents were definitely the kind of people that would die leaving behind a sizable gold mine for their children, that they never got to enjoy themselves. But then maybe that's not really true. Maybe I'm wrong about that. For my parents got a thrill from saving money. That brought them immeasurable joy. So each to his own. After I'd left school, I wanted a year off for myself. I was fatigued from years of studying. I wanted a break. I was ambivalent, hemming and hawing in a quandary of what I actually wanted to do with my life. I needed some precious and valuable time to reflect on this perturbing question, rather than diving into the deep end and tackling a career path that was very wrong for me. I envied many of my unhesitant friends that did not vacillate like I did, but seemed resolute and unwavering in their aspirations for their lives, what degrees they needed to acquire, what path they needed to take. It would seem that they had diligently resolved and cemented their life paths like an assiduous builder, laying down firm, solid foundations for themselves that would not be susceptible to crumbling or falling apart. Most of them were going to the University of Colorado. For me, I was standing at the crossroads, looking at several forks in the road, not confident about travelling down any of them. My feet were hesitant, my mind changeable, temperamental, very fickle, much like the changing seasons, my resolve unaffirmed. That was when my friend Sophia mentioned to me that her grandmother was going to Britain to stay with her sister for 6 months. She'd been asked to stay in her Gram's remote cabin to look after her Jack Russell Terrier Maddie, who she claimed under no circumstances could ever be placed in kennels. It would make the dog far too distraught. She was very particular about her Jack Russell and was desirous for her granddaughter to watch over the little dog. My overbearing mother is insistent I should stay in the remote cabin in the middle of nowhere, she was telling me. I mean, can you believe it? She thinks I should take a whole year off. My grandmother has given me so much during my life, paying for all my extracurricular activities and school fees, so she feels I owe her big time. But look at me. I'm a social bunny. I love to party, to hang around with my friends. Can you imagine me sticking out a remote cabin for 6 months? I'll be tearing my hair out. I'll be bored out of my skull. But does my mother understand? Not a chance. She's laying down the pressure on me. She's already telling my Grams I'll do it. My Grammy is paying big bucks for me to stay there, but I don't want to do it. Well, what are you going to do? I'd asked, knowing from my own personal experience how persuasive forceful parents are inclined to be. It's very difficult to say no to them. I'm going to surreptitiously find someone else to live there for me, while I live in town with Angelica. They don't need to know about it. The question is, who am I going to find willing to spend 6 months in a remote cabin for me? I'll give them Grammy's money to make it worth their while. Hopefully that will be an attractive lure for them. I'll do it, I said, the words slipping out so hastily. I hadn't time to comprehend what I was actually saying. Sophia looked at me cynically, her eyes growing round in surprise. Is this some kind of a wind-up, Jennifer? Or are you being deadly serious? No, I'm being serious. It might suit me down to the ground. I haven't decided what I actually want to do with my life. I'm not like you. I'm not organised in that area. I was planning to take a year off, just to reflect on things, to find out where I want to go. I could do with the money as well, but a quiet place will give me a chance to meditate, to take stock, to make some wise decisions. I need time. I'm very indecisive. It's possibly because I'm a Libra. Well, that's what I've been told anyway. You're a funny one, laughed Sophia. I can't stand quiet, tranquil places. I like to be around the vibrant hustle and bustle of a busy, flamboyant town. Now, are you sure you want to do this, Jennifer? I need you to commit to this 100%. I'm being deadly serious now. I'm not playing any games here. You can't just up and leave when the going gets tough or because you don't like it anymore. You can't let me down. Do you understand? I need your commitment. I nodded. I won't up and leave. You can rely on me. I enjoy my own company. I appreciate the tranquility. But much like every city dweller, I do have 2 concerns. Running water that's hot, electricity, and Wi-Fi connections. Done. She has all of those, Sophia assured me. She's only 15 minutes from Boulder in Colorado, so it's a very efficient cabin. It's got everything you need. I wasn't sure that I was completely stark raving mad to be undertaking this crazy project of looking after a Jack Russell Terrier in a remote rustic cabin in a solitary place, but I had nothing better to do with my time. I couldn't face spending a year at home watching my parents get intoxicated over reduced prices in honey and oatmeal hair shampoo or in Tide washing detergent. So I made haste my escape, packing my bag, taking along with me my big fat black tabby called Chester for the ride. I loved having him around. He had a lazy, laid-back, lackadaisical disposition that was highly infectious, as seeing him at ease with the world made me naturally relax, as pets have that extraordinary capability of soothing and easing your angst, better than any calming medication or even long soaks in a hot bath. Chester had been a rescue kitten. I discovered him fortuitously when I noticed a tied-up shopping bag moving on the side of the road when I was driving off the interstate. The moving bag had demanded my attention, as it struck me as very odd. Was something snagged up in it, I wondered? I pulled over the side of the road and opened the bag to find a frantic kitten caught up inside it. I was appalled that someone had tossed out the bag out of the truck window and left poor Chester to suffocate. I found Chester and he found me. It was a serendipitous affair, and we had been good for each other ever since. In truth, I don't think Chester forgot that I'd rescued him from that evil intent of a clearly vindictive person who had no regard for his little precious life whatsoever. I noticed that he had always been afraid of the sound of rusting plastic bags, which would make perfect sense to me. I mean, could you blame him? Sophia had assured me that her grandmother's Jack Russell Maddie was well used to cats, as her grandmother had raised him with 2 elderly cats that had since passed away. He had been very attached to the creatures. I knew I had to be very careful, as some Jack Russells can be aggressive towards cats. After dropping in at the pretty town of Boulder, situated at the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, at about 5,430 feet above sea level, it is known as one of the best places in America to live for quality of life. It's home to people eager to retire, fitness enthusiasts, along with a plethora of organic goods to purchase for health food junkies, of which there are many in Boulder. I went up there to pick up some food supplies for myself. I'm glad to say I'm not a health food junkie. Life is way too short to get frenzied about food. I also picked up a plethora of dog and cat food supplies, along with some firewood, but I needn't have bothered because I was to find that the cabin was well stocked. I put some petrol in my truck and eagerly made my way to the cabin. I was used to living in the city of Denver, so living in a quiet place like this was going to take a major amount of adjustment for me, but I was looking forward to embracing a whole new experience. It would be an adventure, one of which I approached wholeheartedly, with a fervent enthusiasm. In truth, I got hopelessly lost finding the place, even with my GPS, as it kept losing connection. But finally I found a small country road that led to an open cattle gate, with a sign that read Moonlight Ridge Country Cabin. I breathed a huge sigh of relief. I was finally here, thank goodness. I could hear Chester meowing in the cat basket in the back. Perhaps he sensed by the way I was driving we were nearing our destination. The road to the cabin was an obstacle course in itself, very wobbly, as rocks were scattered precariously over the dirt road. I was jolting all over the place on my approach, but as I neared the cabin I audibly gasped. It was breathtakingly beautiful. I could actually get why someone would want to live in a remote place like this. The endearing rustic cabin was made from old timber beams, very ancient. This wasn't a new cabin, which added to its charm and nostalgic appeal. It was steeped in history, as every timber beam had soaked up the vibrant energy of people from bygone times, when a horse and cart would have been the only mode of transportation. Fortunately, it had been fitted with electricity. There was a bathroom addition to the rear, so that the old outhouse that had once been a separate toilet was being used for firewood storage. The cabin seamlessly blended into the environment, as if it belonged to the valley, like every tree, every blade of grass, every flower in the meadow. It had been built on a white gravel clearing, where a few terracotta plant pots had been bountifully filled with colourful, showy, flowery displays of pink, purple and red geraniums, purple petunias and blue lobelia. Beyond the gravel was a long ribbon of neatly mown grass, hemmed in by a pristinely manicured hedge. But beyond its outer borders and perimeters was a natural flowery meadow, bespeckled with wild flowers of every colour and variety, that swayed so graciously in the wind. There were occasional rocky outcrops, along with a plethora of trees that on the right-hand side sprawled out into a vast wood grove. In the furthest distance you could see the distinguished rise and fall of the commanding mountains that surrendered themselves under the cobalt blue sky, rather like portly men with sizable girths, that were so gargantuan they couldn't move a muscle, so stood perfectly still, basking in the glorious bright congenial sunshine of a new day. I parked my truck on the gravel driveway. As soon as I made my way to the cabin door, I could hear the delighted yelps of the terrier, who welcomed me profusely. Maddie immediately sensed Chester there in the cat box. She became very excited and enamoured. I was initially apprehensive about the two animals' interaction together, but I shouldn't have been worried at all. They bonded instantaneously. It seemed Maddie was rather smitten and in awe of Chester. She seemed to have a huge, remarkable respect for cats, which is unusual for Jack Russell Terriers, but in her case she had grown up with cats. For the first weeks things were uneventful in the cabin. I blended irreproachably into my new life, learning a lot about myself in the process. I realised I relished my own company, along with being up close and personal to the natural world. I was seemingly enchanted by the bird life, butterflies, squirrels, deer, and bedazzling views. I had been getting up reasonably early every morning, going for long leisurely walks in the wood grove, accompanied by the very excitable little Maddie, who smelt every blade of grass, every fern, every briar, with a joyous gusto, lifting up her leg to anoint every available tree trunk with her fragrant doggy spray, to tell all and sundry that were interested that Maddie had been there. It was at night, when I was seated in front of the television set with my remote control, that I did become increasingly nervous and on edge. I was mindfully aware that I was all on my own. But then that did not matter, did it? I mean, this wasn't a city with gangland shootings and drunken brawls. This was the countryside. All that was out there was mountain lions, coyotes and foxes that would likely give the cabin a wide berth. I managed to successfully talk myself into a state of calm, with Maddie sleeping peacefully by my feet, while Chester curled up on my lap. That was when I heard the ominous sound of pebbles outside the cabin, being crunched beneath heavy bipedal feet. It sounded like a human being was walking around the cabin, and whoever they were had substantial footfall. It didn't sound as if they were an animal out there. They could only be human with a guileful intent, I thought. The horrifying revelation hit me like a brick to the head. I could sense and feel danger. The hairs on the back of my neck were prickling and standing on edge. Maddie began to growl. I pushed Chester off my lap, creeping ever so slowly and quietly towards the window. I stealthily pulled back the curtain to look out of the glass pane. Something obscure was standing there, staring in at me with a bright red eyeshine, at about 8 foot off the ground. The silhouette was portentous, so terrifying. I let out a huge, terrified scream. Then this creature, whatever it was, made haste to escape. I could see its dense, tenebrous silhouette running away. Whatever it was very sizable. I immediately dialed the police in Boulder. "Please come at once. There's been an intruder on the property." I had been assured that they would be along shortly. When the familiar police truck with its flashing blue light pulled up to the driveway, I was never more relieved. An officer climbed out of the truck, slamming the door behind him, and surveying the night with his discerning eyes, with the keenness of an owl. Then I heard the knock at my door. I opened it quickly, audibly sighing in relief. Something was here a moment ago, officer. I don't know exactly what it was, but it was looking in at me. It was huge, very, very big. It ran away. It looked human. It had a menacing red eyeshine." "I'm Officer Terence Scott. I'm pleased to make your acquaintance. And you are?" "My name's Katrina Hilton," I told him. "I'm staying here in Mrs. Dottie Penbrook's cabin, while she's away in England with her sister for 6 months. "I see, so you're a city girl, then?" "That's right. I'm from Denver." "I thought as much. You looked like a city girl. So you're staying out here all on your own, are you?" he said, stroking his moustache reflectively. "I ask you, is that a very good idea?" "Isn't it safer here than the city?" I protested. "Of course it's safer than the city," said Officer Scott.
But what you must appreciate is that the country is very different to the city. You can hear sounds at night that might just scare you, simply because you are not used to them. Some animals can make screaming sounds that sound like someone is being murdered. It can be very unsettling and disturbing for a person not acquainted with country life. You may have heard an animal last night or even tonight. The thing that you thought you saw, it might have been a fox or a raccoon just loitering around. It's easy to make your imagination play tricks on you. At night, lots of animals give an eye shine that seems very intimidating, but it's to do with their night vision capabilities.
No, officer, you don't understand. It was looking in at me, whatever it was, standing on 2 feet. It was very big, with red eyes. It stared at me through the window, then it ran away. The officer raised his brow quizzically. I do have to ask you this, ma'am, so please don't take any offence by it. But have you been drinking tonight? Or taking any recreational narcotics? Absolutely not, officer. I'm not delusional. I know what I saw. I didn't drink alcohol. I don't take drugs. I could see Officer Scott looking at me with a measure of scepticism. He had seen city girls like me before, with the propensity to overreact. I assume he thought I'd mistaken the humanoid form I'd discerned as an animal, highly exaggerating its size, but I knew what I'd seen. I watched him going through the motions, examining the immediate area around my cabin, which was completely fruitless, as whatever it was that had been looking in at me had long since absconded. I realised that calling the police out had been a fruitless exercise. I'm sure he considered me a neurotic city girl with a hyped-up imagination that was guilty of watching too many horror movies and filling my head with crazy ideas. I was interpreting every noise in the wilderness as some portentous, dangerous thing. In truth, when I saw the Officer Scott leave, I was heartily relieved to see the back of him. Instead of offering me a measure of reassurance, he'd made me feel like a naive, bundling idiot who had lost leave of my senses and was a silly little girl crying wolf. Granted, I did not know much about the country, nor the strange sounds of the night beyond the chorus of crickets and frogs, but I wasn't a complete dithering fool. I knew I'd seen something that had been standing on 2 feet, but now my sense of reason had been vacuum-suctioned away by the officer's sagacious sense of reason, and probable rational explanations that he offered up to me, to explain away the strange curious noises I'd heard, along with the menacing red eye-shine that had looked in at me. Indeed, he was so masterfully persuasive that I was seriously beginning to doubt myself. Maybe he was right after all. Maybe it was an animal that I'd seen. It could have been a black bear, standing up on its hind legs, I told myself, even though I had vividly remembered the human-like face that had looked in at me. But I deleted those vivid memories from my mind. Maybe it was my way of settling my frayed nerves, calming myself down. I decided that in the light of the new morning the following day I would almost certainly do some exploring to try and find some much-needed answers for myself. The very next day I arose early and went investigating the woodgrove curiously with Maddie at my side leading the way, with a wagging, very expressive tail in its appreciation of the woods. It was evident that this little rambunctious ball of energy knew her way around the woodgrove terribly well. She was having an exuberant time, putting her nose in everything, savouring the cocktail of rich smells she encountered along the way. It did give me pause for thought, as I contemplated what it must be like to zealously explore the world through your nose. The vast array of varying scents, from the floral to the woody, to the acidic markers from animals. What little Maddie was smelling was telling a story. Maddie definitely knew it all, but I was very limited, confined to my meagre, insubstantial eyesight, to only what I could physically see with my eyes. Having said that, what I was beholding did not feel restricted at all, as the woodgrove was spectacular. I was transfixed by the mesmerising beauty of the trees, so tall, so proud, so statuesque, like graceful dancers that rose up graciously into the sky, covered in bountiful boughs of verdant needles. Then there was the forest earthen floor, dappled with beguiling lacy ferns, pretty green shrubbery, as well as a plethora of velvety green moss. The trees congregated together tightly, but with a bounteous amount of space between them. I was able to enjoy walking through them, shaded by the fabulous canopy above my head that allowed faint slivers of glorious sunbeams to twinkle brightly through the branches, to swathe the floor with soft infusions of beguiling light that was gentle and ethereal. The forest was blissfully alive, vibrant, animated, fully engaged with tuneful birdsong. But although I could hear the birds in the trees, I didn't see them. As I was trekking through the grove, the music of the forest receded, as if someone had switched off the background noise very suddenly. Then I noticed little Maddie darting towards me. She dived between my legs to take cover, as if she was terribly afraid of something. If you're well acquainted with Jack Russell Terriers, you will know their natural demeanour is to be a fearless furball. But Maddie was cowering under my legs, behaving in a way that was very unsettling, very distressing. I knew at once that something had seriously troubled her, but what it was, I couldn't imagine. That was when shivers started pulsating down my spine like bright sparks of vibrant electricity, as if every cell of my body was being physically jolted, stunned and shocked. I was overwhelmed with this incredible sense of knowing I was being watched. I could feel an inauspicious, sizable presence around me. I felt certain that a predator was in my midst. Was it a bear? A mountain lion? A coyote, I wondered. I reached out for a stick as a rather clumsy form of protection, I know, but it symbolised safety for me. It gave me a false sense of security. Yet, in truth, what kind of protection would a flimsy little stick offer me? And Maddie, for that matter. Not much, I am most sure. My anxious eyes surveyed every area of the woods gingerly, looking for any signs of movement. But I saw nothing. Yet I could feel a portentous presence around me the whole time. It was as if eyes were drilling into me like a woodpecker digging into a tree trunk. Maddie continued to remain locked in a fearful repose, her dark eyes fixed on a particular spot. So I focused in the same direction where she was looking, but I saw nothing. "Come, Maddie, let's go," I said. That was when I saw some needles on a ponderosa pine tree swaggering, but there was no wind. So why were the branches moving, I wondered. It must be a squirrel, I thought, but then the branches of another tree began to swagger and shake. I became fearful. I turned around to run with Maddie trailing behind me. She was very clingy, making a fearful whimpering sound. The little Jack Russell was absolutely petrified, affirming my very worst fears, that something was definitely there, and whatever it was, it had to be dangerous. I was certain of that. As I was running, I could hear those footsteps behind me, but these footsteps were definitely bipedal, but they were heavy and very weighty. I stopped for a moment, and whoever and whatever was following me stopped at the same time. But then my attention was directed elsewhere. My blood grew icy cold, as lying across the forest floor was a deceased man. I could see the blood trail running down his face, his glazed eyes staring vacantly into space. I screamed. Then I heard a mighty crash as I saw the big creature thrashing through the trees, standing yards away from me. One look at this creature terrified the living daylights out of me. It was over 9 foot tall, easily 800 pounds, possibly more, 3 foot wide across the chest area, monstrously huge, built, and excuse the expression, like a brick shithouse. It was gargantuan. The creature started to grunt. It looked at me through deep-set dark eyes that seemed benevolent, but that must be a ruse, I thought. I hightailed it out of the woods as quickly as I could, with Maddie following behind me. I ran so fast, gulping the air in large, desperate mouthfuls, while my heart began to thrash violently in my chest. My legs seemed to grow springs like a rabbit, as I bounded back to the cabin, locking and bolting the doors behind me as quickly as I could. I dashed around the cabin in a frantic frenzy, looking through all the windows to see if I could see any signs of the strange creature, but I saw nothing. It didn't appear to have followed me. Chester, who was lying across the sofa stretched out happily, looked up in bewilderment to see my bizarre behaviour. If he had been human, he would have said, "What the hell has got into you? You have ants in your pants. Get a grip, girl." I began to dial the police, but in my desperate hurry, I kept pressing the wrong digits. That's what you do when you're nervous. Finally, I did get through to the police.
Can I speak to Terence Scott? It's very important.
Hold on a moment, came a woman's voice. I'm putting you through now.
Officer Terence Scott speaking. How may I help you?
Officer Scott, it's Katrina Hilton speaking. You were at the cabin last night when I reported an intruder. Do you remember that?
Yes, I remember. Is everything all right with you?
Not really, officer. Someone's been murdered in the woodgrove. I saw the perpetrator myself. There was a silence at the end of the phone. For a second, almost as if Officer Terence was digesting exactly what I was saying. I'll be around in a moment, he said. His words seemed to harbour a cynical edge. I wasn't surprised when he came alone in his police truck, without any backup. But that all swiftly changed when he found the deceased murdered body. Before long, the place was lined up with crime scene tape. Several police officers hovered around the place like buzzing bees over a can of sugary cola, while a coroner clad in biohazard gear visited the scene. Then the body was covered with a body bag and taken to the morgue for an autopsy. It was hauntingly surreal to realise that someone had been murdered so close to my cabin. It left an uneasiness transcending over my gut, making me feel distinctly queasy and off colour. The sheriff came into the cubicle to have a few words with me at the station, as I was naturally taken there after this had all transpired. He was an agreeable, congenial man in his early 60s, with a white moustache, white hair, and piercing blue eyes. He took off his cowboy hat and put it down by his side on the large walnut desk.
"Are you all right?"
he asked me. His eyes looked concerned.
"Can I get you a drink or something? It must have been a terrible shock for you to encounter that dead body in the woods. If you need to speak to a trauma counsellor, it can be arranged for you."
"I'm fine," I assured him. "It was a big shock. I'm not going to kid, but I'll get over it."
"Officer Scott tells me you called him last night to the cabin. He said that you were very convinced you'd heard someone walking around the premises."
"I did, Sheriff. I was very scared. That's why I called the police. I promise you my dog was growling, and my cat was visibly upset."
"Well, did you see anything?"
"As it happens, I did. There was a human-like face staring at me in the window."
"Did you get a good look at the face?"
"Well, it was vague, but I knew it must be the perpetrator of the murder. I saw him this morning. He was following me and my dog in the wood green, standing very close to the deceased body."
"So you think the murderer was loitering around long after the crime? I mean, the body looks like it's been deceased for over 24 hours. It would be exceedingly unlikely for a murderer to be hanging around a deceased corpse. You think he's interested in you as well, is that what you're saying?"
"Oh, definitely, Sheriff. Or why would he go around my cabin in the middle of the night? Why would he be looking in at me in the window?"
"What I'd like you to do, Katrina, is to go to the police artist, give a description of the perpetrator to him. Do you think you can do that for me? It would be most appreciated."
I nodded. "Of course, Sheriff," I said. "I'll do anything I can to help." I was led into a cubicle where a man called Shane was going to draw a picture of what I'd seen. He had his pencil and paper at the ready.
"So explain what the man looked like," he said to me.
"Well, he looked like a man, if you know what I mean, but he wasn't exactly." The police artist nibbled the end of his pencil uneasily. He visibly stiffened. His brows crinkled, and furrows developed between them. "Sorry, Katrina. That's your name, is it not?" I nodded. "If you don't mind my saying, you're not exactly making any sense. What do you mean he wasn't a man, exactly?" "Well, he was very tall, 9 feet. The police artist raised a sceptical eyebrow, as if for a moment he thought he was talking to a whack job who was making everything up as she went along for maximum attention.
"Did you say 9 foot?"
"Yes, very hefty. His whole body was covered in hair. He looked human, but he had a cone-shaped head, deep-set dark eyes, and a leathery face." The police artist tapped into his phone. He then showed me a picture of the Patterson footage of a Bigfoot. At that time, I didn't know what a Bigfoot was.
"Do you think it looked a little like this?" he asked me.
I nodded. "Yes, but bigger, slimmer, a lot heavier and much more hair. The face was also a lot more human."
"You don't know what that is?" he asked me.
"No, I don't."
"That's a Bigfoot. You must have seen a Bigfoot. It's a humanoid creature covered in hair. There's one big problem here, Katrina." "Yes," I said, looking incredulous. "What?" "Well, the Bigfoot could not have committed this murder that you claim he did. The deceased body was covered in multiple gunshot wounds."
"But," I stammered, "it was standing near the dead body. It was watching me. It was following me. That happened this morning. The previous night, it was peeking in at the window at me. It was walking around my cabin. I'm certain it was that was walking around my cabin, because it was making a very loud commotion. And this thing is very heavy."
"Well, maybe it was curious, inquisitive," said the police artist. He looked at me. "Look, I believe your story, Katrina. I don't think you're making any of this up. But there are people around here that will think you're completely kooky if you start talking about a Bigfoot like this. If you want my advice, I'd shut up if I was you. I wouldn't say a word to anyone about this. Look, I will tell the police on your behalf that your mind went blank. You couldn't remember a thing. You couldn't remember what the perpetrator looked like. After all, you don't. We established you didn't see the murderer at all. You just saw a Bigfoot."
Thanks, I so appreciate your discretion, Shane. I do feel a bit like an idiot, a real fool. But the trouble is I don't know about Bigfoots. I have sort of heard about the creature before, but I haven't really discussed it much.
"Of course you don't know about it," said Shane. "Living in a city means you're not exposed to discussions about Bigfoot. But there are people who think Bigfoot is a mythical beast, so if I were you, I'd keep my zipper shut." When I arrived back at the cabin, I wasn't sure how safe I felt, knowing that a man had been shot in the woods, and there was a Bigfoot loitering around. I was in two minds of what I should do. I had given my solemn word to Sophia that I would stay at the log cabin for 6 months, but surely these were exceptional, extenuating circumstances, considering a dead body had been found in the woodgrove that wasn't very far from the cabin. As I was dishing out some cat food on a plate for Chester, who had been meowing to be fed, my gaze landed on a letter addressed to Sophia from her grandmother that said, "To Sophia, instructions while I'm away." It dawned on me that I was filling in for Sophia, so the letter was really meant for me, not for her. It read, "My dearest darling Sophia, I cannot tell you how grateful I am to you, my love, that you're looking after Maddie for me. She's a very special little dog. I know she'll be exceedingly safe in your charge. I also understand that being out in the countryside, after you're used to the vibrant buzz and excitement of the city, will be a great adjustment for you. But I truly appreciate the sacrifice you are making on my account. Do not forget that I do realize this. But it pleases me greatly to know that Maddie is in such brilliant hands. You have always been so good with her. I feel I'd better warn you that your presence on my property might arouse the curiosity of a Bigfoot that I call Big Boots. I assure you he's a benevolent little creature, well, large creature, who's very comical. You might find him peeking in at the cabin at night, or secretly watching you when you go walking with Maddie. He might even follow you around, as he does with me. He's done that for over 20 years now. I've grown fond of him. Maddie is very intimidated by him. He scares her. But don't be afraid of him, my dear. He will do you no harm at all. In truth, you're probably a lot safer with him around. I hope this time of getting up and close and personal with nature will make you consider the wonders of the natural world. They really are quite marvellous, dear. After you've spent a long time in my cabin, I think you will begin to realise and understand why I have made this place my home. Your loving Grammy. I could hardly believe the contents of the letter. There was me falsely accusing the Bigfoot of the murder, when all the time he was innocent. The only thing he could really be accused of was being intimidating in both weight and size, and also being ultra-nosy, which is hardly the crime of the century. It would explain that all the noises I was hearing at night were all down to an inquisitive Bigfoot. Still, there was one mystery that remained unanswered and unsolved. Who was the dead man in the woodgrove? Why had he been shot multiple times? Little did I know that the answers would soon be forthcoming by Officer Scott, who popped around to see me to enlighten me on the case. I came around to tell you about the dead man found in the woods. It's not normally police protocol to talk about the victim like this, and why he was shot. But the sheriff thinks it's a good idea you know what's going on in these extenuating circumstances. You have the right to know what happened to him."
"I really appreciate that, officer. I would like to know."
"Of course you would. Do you mind if I sit down?"
"Of course, Officer Scott. Mind my manners, please," I said, inviting him into the cabin, offering him the large upholstered chair in the living room. He sat down gratefully. "Can I get you some coffee?"
"That would be very nice. Milk with 1 sugar, please."
I watched as Officer Scott grabbed his coffee, took a large swig.
"You never get over a murder ever in the force. It's always sad, you know, that the person lying there deceased is someone's loved one. The worst part is informing the loved ones left behind that their son, their brother or husband is deceased, especially when it's so nonsensical in the way that he died."
I nodded. "Well, it can't be easy for you, can it? I imagine your job must be pretty tough. Was the deceased married?"
"Thankfully not," said Officer Scott, taking another swig of coffee. "This is good stuff."
"So did you find out who murdered him and why?"
"Oh, yes. His name was Hugh by all accounts. This wasn't a difficult case to solve at all. With those gunshots, we all knew the crime was personal. When someone continues to shoot a person long after they're dead, you know that the perpetrator is very angry. He's expressing his rage. So you look at the person's immediate circle to find out who might have upset the man enough to end up taking his life. It's not too hard to find answers, to pick up guilty body language. The moment I met Hugh's best friend, he was so distraught. I suspected him at once of the murder. He wasn't behaving right. When we brought him in for questioning, he was a nervous wreck, twitching anxiously. His leg was constantly thumping up and down under the chair. He tried desperately to avoid direct eye contact with any of us. We knew immediately he was hiding something, so we had to get him to talk. We won over his trust, gave him donuts and Coca-Cola. Finally, he buckled under the intense scrutiny, confessed to the crime, admitted to shooting his best friend several times in a moment of incandescent rage that had accumulated over a day or so. Of course, in the aftermath of the tragedy, he was exceedingly remorseful, rarely regrets what he's done, because by all accounts he's lost a very good friend.
But what could be so bad that he would kill his friend like that?
The perpetrator's name is Rupert. He shot his friend over a lottery ticket, would you believe? He got his friend Hugh to purchase his regular ticket with the usual numbers on the payslip. I gather he's been using these special numbers that are unique to him week after week, month after month, year after year without fail. His best friend knew the numbers, was well acquainted with them, and went to get him the ticket. Then they discovered he'd won over $10 million on the lottery, which Rupert discovered was a sizable fortune. Of course, his friend insisted they split the winnings in half, each getting $5 million. Hugh explained to him it was only fair that he got half the money, as he was the one that had purchased the ticket. Rupert didn't think this was reasonable. A huge fight ensued that resulted in a physical altercation. Rupert wanted to give his friend $100,000 for his trouble, but that was that. That was where he drew the line. In the end, he played along with his friend, telling him he would give him half the money, that he would give him $5 million. But he didn't really mean it. He suggested they take a walk on an unused hiking trail, which was here on the property, to discuss the $5 million that they were each going to get. He happened to know the place very well, that woodgrove. It was a ruse so he could shoot his friend, as he had no intention of giving him a single penny.
I gasped. That's terrible. The love of money can do the strangest things to people, and the nicest people too. But I do know what it's like. My parents have a quirky relationship with money themselves. They get excited over any savings they make, even though they have a sizable bank account. Officer Scott laughed. Money can be the root of all evil, if greed's involved. It can make people do outrageous things. I'm sure now that I've told you what happened, you'll feel a lot safer out here, knowing that no one is loitering in the woods, and that the perpetrator has been arrested. Thanks for telling me, officer. I really appreciate it. Needless to say, I did stay on in the cabin for the required length of time, and was regularly shadowed by Boots the Bigfoot, who would often peek in at me through the window. I would get random sightings of him, but he always remained in the shadows. But I knew in the end
that he was indeed a benign, benevolent fellow. So there you are. That's my story.
Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.